The sky above the celestial spire is breaking. High Oracle Lyra stands at its peak, her hands raised as she pours the last reserves of the kingdom's starlight into the great beacon. This is a desperate act, a final defense against the creeping umbral veil that seeks to envelop their world in lasting shadow. Her only goal is to buy a few more precious moments for her people to find their way forward. But the ancient magic is faltering under the strain. A hidden flaw, concealed for centuries, now reveals itself. The brilliant beacon flickers violently, and the immense power surging through Lyra threatens to overwhelm her from within. High above, the first hairline fractures trace across the dome of the sky itself. By the end of our journey, you will understand how the passing of a civilization can plant the seeds for a new kind of hope, a lesson in resilience that echoes through the ages. We will uncover why the most powerful magic is not in grand beacons, but in the stories we choose to preserve. I would love to know where you are listening from right now, and what the local time is for you. What do you believe is the one thing a society truly needs to survive its most challenging moments? Lyra stood before the Starborn Council, the dire energy of the fractured sky still humming in her veins. She laid out the evidence with a calm she did not feel, describing the cascading failures in the Great Beacon and the accelerating decay of the umbral veil. Her plea was simple and stark. The capital city of Ethelgard must be evacuated, immediately and completely. For a long moment, the only sound in the opulent chamber was the faint, sorrowful chime of the crystal ceiling. Then Archon Kale, his robes of office woven from threads of solidified sunlight, rose to speak. He dismissed her prognosis as the fear-driven words of an overworked oracle. The council, he declared, would not authorize a mass departure that would disrupt public order and erase centuries of tradition. Their solution was one of control, not escape. They decreed stricter rationing of the kingdom's dwindling starlight, a determined attempt to preserve the status quo. The public challenge to Lyra's authority was a sobering moment, creating a deep and visible rift at the very heart of their leadership. It was the timeless conflict between a visionary who sees the coming change and the traditionalists who refuse to leave a familiar, yet fading, shore. That night, in defiance of the council's direct order, Lyra made her own decision. She summoned her most trusted scout, a young man named Finn, known for his swiftness and silence. She gave him a single, perilous mission. He was to journey beyond the known realms, into the desolate wastes, to seek the lost star forges. These ancient, legendary workshops were rumored to hold the primordial power to mend the very fabric of the heavens. This political division, this failure of the kingdom to act as one, left them critically vulnerable, and the umbral veil, sensing this fragility, seemed to pulse with renewed vigor. Its advance accelerated, swallowing the last light over the outer farmlands and casting them into a lasting, quiet night. As the first vital crops began to fade in the unnatural darkness, Finn slipped through the city's western moon gate. He carried no royal decree, only Lyra's determined hope, his path illuminated by the few, faint stars that still dared to shine. The Glimmer wood was a forest of fading memories, its paths once traced by the gentle glow of celestial moss. Now Finn moved through a landscape of deepening shadows, his every step a quiet negotiation with the encroaching dark. He navigated not by sight alone, but by a deep, internal knowledge of the stellar pathways, the old rivers of energy that once flowed between the stars. Where these pathways had faded completely, the air grew unnaturally cold and still, a quiet void that seemed to swallow sound and warmth alike. He carefully skirted these patches of total absence, his senses strained to their limit. It was in one of the last places where the ancient light still pooled that he made a poignant discovery, a hidden grove where the trees themselves were not wood, but woven from solidified light. They stood as magnificent, silent witnesses to a grander age, their branches forming intricate constellations against the canopy. But as Finn drew closer, he saw the truth. The great roots of these luminous trees were crumbling into motes of fading gold, and their brilliant canopies were dimming like forgotten embers. From this fading splendor, the shade emerged. It was not a creature of flesh, but a presence, a living patch of silence and cold that flowed over the forest floor. It had no form to strike, no voice to challenge. It was simply a wave of negation, an entity whose only purpose seemed to be the extinction of light. The air around Finn grew bitingly cold, and the very sound of his breathing was stolen away. Instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet felt anchored to the spot. In that moment of frozen uncertainty, his hand closed around the single sun Pearl Lyra had entrusted to him. Its warmth was a tiny, defiant heartbeat against his palm. He knew its power was not meant for attack. It was a tool of creation, not destruction. So as the shade enveloped him, he did not throw it. Instead, he poured his own will into the pearl and let its light go free. The resulting flash was not an explosion, but a sudden, brilliant dawn that blossomed silently in the heart of the grove. For one pure, searing instant, the gloom was banished and the shade recoiled, not in pain, but in what seemed like confusion at this bold assertion of day. Finn did not wait. He turned and ran. The image of the crumbling light trees burned into his mind. His escape was a victory, but a sobering one. The shade's advance confirmed a troubling suspicion. The umbral veil was not some mindless cosmic weather. It was a sentient, hunting force, actively seeking out the last vestiges of starlight to consume them. Yet his brilliant solution created a new and more immediate concern. That silent flash of artificial sunlight, while it saved him, had painted a perfect target on his back. In the deep and watchful darkness of the Glimmer wood, other, hungrier things had seen the sudden light, and they now began to stir, their attention firmly fixed on the fleeting warmth of the scout who dared to carry a piece of the sun. The quiet of the royal archives felt like a physical presence, heavy with the dust of centuries past. Lyra moved through the sealed section by the light of a single, hovering crystal, its beam illuminating shelves of crystal tablets whose inner glow had long since faded. She was not searching for a simple historical record. She was hunting for a whisper, a trace of the truth the council refused to hear. Her fingers traced the glyphs on an obsidian plinth, and there she found it, the prophecy of the Unmaking. It spoke not of a single event, but of a cycle, a recurring celestial tide where a primordial shadow, born from the very absence of creation, would rise to consume the light. The text was clear. The star forges were not merely workshops for crafting starlight. In an age beyond memory, they had been designed as containment vessels, intricate structures meant to hold the first, raw echoes of this consuming darkness. Their abandonment, Their fall into legend had not been an accident of time. It was a failure of vigilance. The ancient seals had been weakening for generations, their power fading as the memory of their purpose was lost. This was the hidden flaw in their world, the reason the great beacon was failing. They were not fighting an invasion. They were witnessing a great and terrible release. The heavy door to the archives groaned open, shattering the profound quiet. Archon Kale stood framed in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. He had been informed of her unauthorized presence. He did not shout. His voice was a low, dangerous tremor as he accused her of heresy, of using forbidden texts to spread fear and undermine the stability of the kingdom. He told her that her status as High Oracle, a title she had earned through a lifetime of study, was now hanging by the thinnest of threads. In that moment, Lyra faced a choice. She could bow to his authority, retreat, and preserve her position, ensuring a slow, managed decline into shadow, or she could trust the one thing she had always believed in, the power of truth. She met his angry gaze and began to read the prophecy aloud, not just the fragments that spoke of an end, but the entire context. She showed him the intricate diagrams of the forges, not as tools of creation, but as locks of immense complexity. She appealed not to the politician who feared panic, but to the historian in him, the guardian of their people's entire legacy. She asked him what was more important, preserving a fleeting, comfortable present, or protecting the very story of who they were, a story that was now actively being erased. Kale listened, his initial anger giving way to a deep, unsettling stillness. The rigid certainty in his eyes fractured, replaced by a flicker of profound doubt. He did not grant her forgiveness, nor did he recant his accusations, but he also did not have her removed from the archives. He simply turned and left, a silent concession that her search, however dangerous, might hold a key he was not yet brave enough to grasp. That small opening was all Lyra needed, a sliver of continued access, though she knew her every move would now be watched. Later that night, as she pored over another fragile scroll, a deep rumble echoed from the oldest wing of the archives. It was not the sound of stone falling, but of knowledge turning to dust. An entire section of the vault, containing the earliest histories of the Starborn themselves, simply collapsed in on itself, the ancient tablets dissolving into fine, gray powder. It was as if the knowledge contained within was too fragile, too antithetical to the growing dark, and could no longer maintain its form in the world. The past was not just being forgotten, it was being actively unmade. The weight of his own exhaustion was a heavier burden than any pack. Finn stumbled into the cave system, more by blind luck than by navigation. His side, throbbing where a shard of obsidian like rock had torn his tunic and skin during his desperate flight. The air here was cool and carried the faint, earthy scent of damp stone, and it was lit, not by starlight, but by a soft, persistent glow. Colonies of fungi clung to the walls and ceiling, their caps pulsing with a gentle blue and green luminescence, creating a subterranean sky of living constellations. In the center of the largest cavern, he saw her. An elderly woman, her hair as white as spun moonlight, was carefully tending to a small, natural basin filled not with water, but with a shimmering, liquid silver substance. This was a star well, a tiny echo of the great power that had once sustained his home. Her name was Alara, and she was a keeper, one of a solitary order who maintained these hidden springs of celestial energy long after the world above had forgotten their purpose. She tended to his wounds with a practiced calm, her hands steady, but as she worked, Finn's eyes were drawn to the well itself. Its radiant surface was not still. It was marred by dark, oily patches that swirled and spread, causing the liquid light to flicker unsteadily. "It is failing," Ilara confirmed, her voice soft as the cave's whisper. "All of them are." The forges were not just containers, they were the source, the heart that pumped this energy through the world. Without them, every star well, every beacon, will eventually go dark. Her solution was as terrifying as it was simple. They could not simply find a forge and hope for the best. They had to travel to the greatest of them all, the Adamant forge, hidden deep within the treacherous sunken peaks, and reignite its dormant heart. Finn felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. His mission was reconnaissance, to find a path and report back. The idea of actively meddling with such a primordial power, of turning it back on like some forgotten engine, filled him with a deep, instinctive fear. What if they could not control it? What if their actions caused a greater problem than the slow fading they now faced? He voiced these fears aloud, his words echoing his counsel's own hesitation. Ilara listened, then asked him a single, piercing question. Is a slow, certain end truly safer than a chance, however slim, at a new dawn? She had spent her life in quiet guardianship, and she believed the ancients did not build these wonders to be feared, but to be used by those brave enough to remember how. Looking from her determined, weathered face to the struggling light of the well, Finn saw the ghost of his own kingdom's future. He had been sent to find a solution, and here one was, offered not by a weapon, but by a keeper's enduring faith. He made his choice. He would guide Ilara to the sunken peaks. His scouting skills would navigate the physical dangers of the land, and her deep knowledge of the old magic would hopefully shield them from the deeper perils of the Veil. It was a partnership forged from desperation, a fragile new hope built on the combined strength of action and wisdom. But their path would be the most dangerous imaginable, a direct route through the territory where the umbral veil was at its most concentrated and potent. As they gathered their meager supplies, a subtle change began to unfold around them. One by one, the glowing fungi on the cavern walls began to dim, their gentle light extinguished not by time, but by an advancing, silent tide of shadow that crept into the mouth of the cave. The first drop fell not as rain, but as a tear of pure night. It struck a street lamp in the market district with a soft hiss, and the warm, familiar glow winked out of existence. Then another fell, and another, until the sky above Ethelgard was weeping a quiet, chilling darkness. These droplets of condensed shadow did not wet the skin, but they chilled the spirit, extinguishing small fires, sputtering lanterns, and the last fragile embers of hope. A collective murmur of fear rippled through the city, quickly escalating into a frantic scramble. People surged into the streets, desperate to claim any source of protected light, their faces etched with a primal terror of the encroaching void. The city guard, trained for order and not for this metaphysical siege, was quickly overwhelmed, their commands lost in the rising tide of panic. From her high spire, Lyra felt the city's despair as a physical blow. She saw the chaos unfolding in the main square, a swirling mass of shadows and terrified citizens. Without a second thought, without consulting the silent council, she acted. Raising her hands, she poured the last of her personal reservoir of starlight outward, not as a weapon, but as a shield, A shimmering dome of soft, blue-white energy bloomed over the crowded square, a temporary sanctuary that caught the falling darkness and dissolved it into harmless mist. The immediate effect was a stunned, grateful silence, but the effort cost her dearly, draining her strength and leaving her trembling, supported only by the cold stone of her balcony. Looking down at the frightened faces now bathed in her protective glow, Lyra knew that order could not be commanded from on high any longer. It had to be built from the ground up. She descended into the square, her voice clear and steady as she cut through the lingering fear. She did not promise salvation. She called for solidarity. She asked for volunteers, for anyone with a steady hand and a brave heart to become a light warden, to help protect their neighbors and guide others to safety. Her plea was a direct answer to the council's inaction, a quiet rebellion that resonated deeply with a people hungry for leadership. Dozens stepped forward, their own small lights held high in defiance. This spontaneous act of organization did more than just calm the crowd. It ignited a movement. The people of Ithilgard now had two sources of authority: the distant, paralyzed council in its fortified tower, and Lyra, standing among them in the weeping square, sharing their peril. A new, fragile power structure was born in that moment, built not on tradition, but on immediate need and mutual trust. Later, exhausted but unable to rest, Lyra watched from her spire as the protective dome began to flicker under the relentless weeping. In the distance, she saw a single light warden, a brave soul carrying a lantern through an unprotected alley. A heavy droplet of darkness fell directly upon the flame. There was no sound, only a swift, silent extinguishing of that solitary point of light. It was a grim omen, a stark reminder that their courage was a finite resource being steadily eroded by an infinite, patient night. The chasm of lost voices opened before them, a vast gulf of absolute silence, where even the air seemed afraid to stir. Spanning this emptiness was the Bridge of Whispers, a structure of breathtaking and terrible beauty. It was not built of stone or wood, but of petrified light, a solidified river of ancient starlight that had frozen mid-flow, but its brilliant glow was now sickly and dim, and a spiderweb of dark fractures crept across its surface. As Finn placed a cautious foot upon it, the bridge did not just groan with physical strain, it spoke. A soft, insistent murmur rose from the cracks, a chorus of forgotten hopes and stolen dreams, the last thoughts of all who had been touched by the advancing veil. The whispers did not shout, they insinuated. For Alara, they coalesced into a voice she had not heard in decades, the gentle, scholarly tone of her lost mentor. "Why continue, my dear?" It sighed from the very air around her. "Your vigilance has been noble, but it is over. The forges are quiet now. Come, rest here with me in the quiet." The words struck with the force of a physical blow, and Alara faltered, her eyes losing their focus as a profound weariness seemed to drain the strength from her limbs. At the same time, the bridge shuddered violently, a large section of its railing crumbling away into the void below. Finn lunged forward, gripping Alara's arm to steady her, while his other hand desperately sought a solid hold on the cracking surface. Their progress became an agonizingly slow ballet of physical and mental endurance, each step forward a battle against the bridge's decay and the whisper's despair. Finn could feel the cold doubt seeping into his own mind, whispering of his inevitable failure and the futility of their quest. He knew he could not fight the voices with logic or force. Then he remembered Lyra's lesson about the nature of their magic, that it was woven from memory and emotion. Closing his eyes against the terrifying drop, he did not build a wall in his mind. Instead, he reached for the oldest, purest memory he possessed, the first time he had ever truly seen the stars. He was a small child, lying on a high meadow, his father's hand on his shoulder, as the entire celestial tapestry bloomed above him in a silent, glorious explosion of silver. He did not just recall it, he projected it, wrapping the memory around himself and Alara like a shield. The effect was immediate. The vision of that innocent, awe-filled night blossomed in the air around them, not as light, but as a feeling of profound safety and wonder. The insistent whispers seemed to slither away from this pocket of pure, positive memory, unable to gain purchase where such simple joy resided. The bridge itself seemed to grow momentarily more solid under their feet. They hurried the last few steps, stumbling onto the solid ground of the far ledge just as the memory faded. Finn collapsed to his knees, not from physical exhaustion, but from emotional drain. Sharing that core part of himself had left him feeling raw and exposed, as if he had opened a window into his soul. The umbral veil, which had merely been a presence before, now felt like a watchful intelligence. It had tasted their memories, learned the specific shape of their fears and their hopes. Their greatest strength had become a potential vulnerability. Before them, the path did not lead to a gentle slope, but was blocked by a sheer, obsidian cliff face. Carved into the glistening black rock, however, was not a dead end, but a guide. An intricate map of stellar pathways and mountain ranges was etched deep into the stone, its lines faintly pulsing with a residual energy. One path glowed more brightly than the others, a route that wound its way down, deep into the jagged, waiting shadows of the sunken peaks. The Archon's private chambers were a sanctuary of ordered tradition, but tonight the air felt thin and fragile. Kale stood with his back to Lyra, his gaze fixed on the illuminated city map, glowing on his wall, its light sputtering with the same uneven rhythm as his own pulse. "You have divided the council and sown discord in the streets," he stated, his voice dangerously low. "Your unsanctioned light wardens, your defiance. It must end. This is not a request, Oracle. It is a command for the stability of the crown." Lyra did not flinch or offer excuses. Instead, she stepped forward and opened her hand. Resting on her palm was a shard of crystal, no larger than a coin, taken from the base of the great beacon itself. It should have been blazing with an unwavering inner fire, a piece of the celestial heart of their world. Now it was a dull, cracked thing, its light guttering like a fading breath. She did not need to speak. The evidence was there, cold and undeniable in his perfectly ordered room. Their time was not measured in weeks for planning and dignified transitions. It was measured in a handful of days, perhaps less. Kale's stern composure shattered. The weight of the relic seemed to pull the very air from his lungs. He saw not a piece of crystal, but the memory of his entire reign, of every king and queen who had come before him, all turning to dust in Lyra's hand. The tradition he had sworn to uphold was a chain pulling them all into shadow. His loyalty to the past warred violently with his duty to the future. To follow the council's law was to preside over a graceful, obedient conclusion. To listen to this heretic was to betray everything he had ever stood for. In the crushing silence, a choice was made. He did not call his guards. He did not have her detained. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached not for the shard, but for a heavy, sun-metal key on a chain around his own neck. "This grants access to the Royal Starlight Reserves," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The entire emergency cache. Use it. Save who you can." It was an act of defiance that would see him stripped of his title and exiled if discovered, yet he placed the key in her hand without another word. This secret pact transformed their struggle. Lyra now had the power to sustain her network of light wardens, and perhaps even fuel a desperate departure. But it also forged a blade that hung over both their heads, its point aimed at their hearts. Later, alone, Kale stood before the crown jewels displayed on velvet in a glass case. He watched the central sunstone, the very symbol of his office, flicker with a weak, uncertain light. It was no longer a beacon of authority, but a mirror reflecting his own fractured soul, a ruler who had just broken his most sacred oath in the faint, desperate hope for a dawn he would never see. The descent into the Glimmerdark Gorge felt like stepping into a dying constellation. All around them, the last of the wild star beasts moved in slow, sorrowful patterns. A family of luminous foxes, their coats once a cascade of silver sparks, now huddled together, their light reduced to a faint, feverish shimmer. Great, winged serpents that should have been tracing ribbons of fire in the air instead lay coiled on ledges, their scales dull and cold. The very light of their lives was being methodically drawn away, pulled from them by thin, vine-like tendrils of the umbral veil that crept down the obsidian walls, pulsating with a faint, stolen luminescence as they fed. It was the star deer that truly moved Alara. The young creature was trapped against a sheer rock face, its magnificent antlers, which should have been a crown of living starlight, tangled in a thick net of the dark tendrils. With every panicked struggle, its brilliant form dimmed further, its silent distress echoing in the oppressive quiet. "We cannot leave it," Alara whispered, her voice thick with a grief that was both personal and profound. To abandon such a creature to this fate is to surrender our own souls. Finn saw the immediate danger. Freeing the deer would mean engaging the veil directly, attracting its full attention in a place where they were already dangerously exposed. But looking at the deer's fading light, he knew she was right. This was no longer just about their mission. It was about the kind of world they were fighting for. He quickly formed a desperate plan. They had a small pouch of light crystals, their last reliable source of illumination. He proposed using them not as a weapon, but as a distraction. He would hurl the crystals in a wide arc further down the gorge. The sudden, brilliant flare of unattached starlight should be an irresistible lure for the predatory tendrils, drawing them away from their captive. It was a gamble, sacrificing their primary light source for a single act of mercy. Alara agreed without hesitation, as Finn scattered the crystals, creating a series of bright, fleeting beacons. The dark vines reacted instantly. They uncoiled from the walls with a liquid swiftness, moving toward the new feast. In that brief window, Alara stepped forward. She did not chant or gesture dramatically. Instead, she hummed a single, pure note, a frequency that resonated with the fundamental energy of light. From her fingertips flowed a gentle, scissors-like beam of concentrated will. She carefully severed the bonds holding the star deer, her focus absolute as the last of the tendrils recoiled from their interrupted meal. The moment it was free, the star deer did not flee. It steadied itself for a moment, then bowed its head to Alara, its antlers flickering back to life with a soft, grateful radiance. Then it turned and trotted toward a section of the gorge wall that appeared utterly solid. With a touch of its nuzzle, a hidden passage revealed itself, its interior lined with naturally glowing moss that pulsed in time with the deer's own restored light. This was their reward, a secret path known only to the creatures of this place, but the cost of their compassion was high. Their pouch of light crystals was now empty, and Alara was visibly drained, leaning heavily on her staff. They had traded a tangible tool for an intangible guide, a choice that felt both foolish and noble. Following the radiant deer, they moved quickly through the illuminated tunnel until the passage opened at last onto a windswept ledge. There, the star deer paused, looking out across a vast, shadowy expanse. And there, finally, they saw it. The sunken peaks rose in the distance, not reaching for the heavens, but submerged in the earth, a colossal and silent place of forgotten power, waiting in the deep dark. The air in the hidden grove hummed with a tension that was both sacred and overwhelming. Lyra stood at the center of a ring of her most steadfast light wardens, the heavy key from Archon Kale cool against her palm. With a deep breath, she inserted it into the air itself, unlocking the invisible vault that held the kingdom's final reserve of royal starlight. A river of pure, liquid silver erupted from nothingness, swirling around the gathered defenders. She did not command them to be brave. She asked them to remember the warmth of a shared meal, the laughter of a child, the quiet comfort of a familiar street at dusk. As she recited the ancient words of the Oath of the Dawn, each warden focused on their own anchoring memory, weaving it into the ritual. The effect was immediate. A soft, resilient light bloomed within each of them, a core of personal dawn that pulsed in unison, shielding their spirits from the gnawing emptiness of the veil. For a moment, they shone like a new constellation born on the earth. That constellation became a beacon. The powerful surge of concentrated hope was a flare in the pervasive night, a signal for the entities that fed on silence. From the deep shadows beyond the city walls, a swarm of shades began to coalesce, a tide of living nothingness that flowed toward Ethelgard with a single-minded hunger. The city guard at the outer ramparts stood their ground, but their polished spears and disciplined formations were useless against an adversary that had no form to pierce and no mind to fear. The guards' courage faltered as an unnatural cold swept over the walls, extinguishing their torches and the warmth in their hearts. They broke, their lines dissolving into a frantic retreat. Lyra saw the collapse from her vantage point. There was no time for panic, only for a terrible, clear-headed decision. She ordered her newly illuminated wardens to form a phalanx, not to attack, but to shine. They moved as one body, a wedge of brilliant, defiant light, positioning themselves between the fleeing guards and the advancing swarm. They became the new front line, a living barrier that the shades recoiled from, confused and repelled by the intensity of their collective memory and will. Step by deliberate step, the light wardens led a controlled withdrawal, drawing the predatory darkness away from the Pact's civilian districts and into the narrower, more defensible streets of the inner city, where barricades of enchanted crystal had been hastily erected. This first true engagement proved that the umbral veil was not an unstoppable force of nature. It could be outmaneuvered, its attention diverted by a stronger, more compelling light. But this tactical lesson was paid for with a heavy price. Many brave wardens, their inner light stretched to its absolute limit, saw their personal dawns flicker and fade under the relentless pressure. Their resilience was consumed, and they fell, not with wounds, but simply becoming still in the silence they fought. And with every passing moment, the Royal Starlight Reserve, the last legacy of a 1,000-year reign, flowed out from Lyra's hands and was irrevocably spent. It was a resource that could never be replenished. As the final shade was repelled from the last barricade, dissolving back into the general gloom, a fragile quiet settled over the inner city. Lyra, her own energy nearly spent, looked past the exhausted, grieving faces of her surviving followers. Her gaze was drawn to the horizon, where the darkness was no longer a flat veil, but had begun to churn and coalesce into something far larger and more organized. The skirmish was over. They had bought a little more time, but the victory felt hollow. The light they had just used to survive had also shown the true storm exactly where they were. The cavern was a cathedral of pure crystal, its vaulted ceiling lost in a darkness that even their last glowstone could not pierce. And there, in the very center, stood the Adamant forge. It was not a workshop of fire and anvil, but a colossal, geometric heart of obsidian and diamond, silent and utterly still. Its surfaces, which should have been blazing with the light of a contained sun, were dark. Finn felt the profound silence, not as an absence of sound, but as an absence of time itself. This was the resting place of a miracle. Moving closer, their footsteps echoing in the immense space, they saw the truth of its dormancy. At the forge's core hung a sphere of what seemed like solidified night, but within it pulsed a faint, rhythmic, golden light. The captive star was not extinguished. It was held in place, bound by an intricate, web-like cage of shadowy filaments that seemed to draw its light directly from the source. The filaments pulsed with a sickly, borrowed radiance, each throb a whisper of the veil's pervasive hunger. Alara approached the core, her face illuminated by its struggling heartbeat. She understood the mechanism immediately. The filaments were a parasitic lock, a perfect inversion of the forge's purpose. To remove them required a precise, simultaneous application of energy to every connection point. It was a task of impossible delicacy. A single misdirected surge, one filament severed out of sequence, and the unstable core would not ignite. It would either collapse into a void that consumed them all, or violently unravel in a cataclysm of raw power. They had the knowledge, but their remaining strength was a thimble of water against a desert of need. Alara turned to Finn, her expression serene and filled with a terrible resolve. She would not ask him to share this burden. The ignition sequence required a catalyst of pure, untainted starlight, the very essence of a keeper's long guardianship. She would channel her own life force into the forge, using the last of her being as the key to turn the lock. It was not a choice made in despair, but one offered with a quiet and certain hope. She had spent her life tending the small, fading lights of the world. Now, she would give her own to rekindle the greatest of them all. As she placed her hands upon the cold crystal of the control plinth and closed her eyes, a soft, silver light began to emanate from her, flowing from her fingertips into the ancient machine. The forge shuddered, and deep within, the caged star flared with a sudden, brilliant intensity. But the cavern did not just tremble from the reawakening power. From the deep, foundational rock beneath them came a different vibration, a slow, grinding shift of immeasurable weight. It was the sound of the mountain itself stirring. A low, echoing roar, like stone tearing itself apart, rumbled through the chamber. From a vast fissure in the cavern wall, a form began to emerge, a giant of living rock and captured starfire, its single eye opening like a dying sun. The guardian of the forge was awake, and it had felt the touch of an unfamiliar hand upon its charge. The stone sentinel's roar was the sound of the mountain's fury-given voice. It moved with a terrible, grinding grace, its colossal fist of granite, and captured Starlight, slamming down where Finn had stood a heartbeat before. Shards of crystal exploded from the cavern floor. Finn's short sword was a useless sliver of metal against this guardian of living rock, his desperate slash scraping harmlessly off its leg. He tried a flash of light, a burst from the last sun pearl, but the sentinel absorbed the energy, its single eye blazing brighter with stolen power. It was not angered, it was fortified. Each attempt only made the guardian stronger. Behind him, Alara was a statue of concentration, her hands fused to the control plinth, a conduit of silver energy flowing from her into the dormant forge. To interrupt her now would mean her sacrifice was for nothing, and the core would be lost forever. Finn understood then that this was not a monster to be fought. It was a testament, a final, unyielding command from a forgotten age to protect this sacred place from all who would disturb it. His weapons fell from his hands, clattering on the stone. He stepped directly into the sentinel's path, defenseless, and did the only thing he had left. He opened his mind and heart, not with a warrior's challenge, but with a scout's honesty. He projected the memory of Lyra's strained face as she gave him his mission, the sight of his city weeping drops of shadow, the fading light in the eyes of the star deer. He showed the sentinel not a plunderer's greed, but a protector's desperate hope. He offered a simple, clear feeling, the pure intention to save the very kingdoms this forge was built to sustain. The sentinel's massive fist, raised for a final crushing blow, froze in midair. The giant's single eye, a miniature dying sun, fixed on Finn, its ancient programming etched into its stone heart over millennia, warred with the undeniable sincerity it sensed. This was not a thief. This was a bearer of the same oath. For 3 long, breathless seconds, the universe hung in the balance. It was all the time Alara needed. With a final, surrendering breath, she poured the last essence of her life into the forge. A wave of pure, silent power erupted from the core. The captive star shattered its shadowy cage and blazed with the fury of a newborn sun. Light, true and unstoppable, flooded the cavern in a cleansing dawn, scouring the shadows from the walls and halting the sentinel completely. Its stony form gleamed, no longer a threat, but a monument bathed in the light it was sworn to guard. Finn shielded his eyes from the glorious glare, turning to where Alara had stood. She was gone, her form dissolved into motes of light that now swirled peacefully into the heart of the rekindled forge, her long vigil finally, perfectly, complete. The Adamant forge was awake, but the light that now blazed from the sunken peaks was a beacon seen by more than just the hopeful. Deep in the void between realms, something vast and hungry shifted its attention, turning toward this sudden, brilliant disturbance in the endless night. A pillar of pure, white fire tore through the heavens above the sunken peaks. It was a new sun, a defiant answer to the long night, its brilliance so intense it cast sharp, clean shadows in the streets of distant Ethelgard. For the first time in weeks, true, unfiltered light touched the city, and the weeping drops of shadow dissolved into harmless mist before they could even land. The oppressive gloom of the umbral veil recoiled, pulling back from the city walls like a scalded hand, revealing a patch of genuine, star-filled sky. A collective gasp swept through the populace, followed by a wave of disbelieving joy. The long silence was broken by the sound of genuine, hopeful cheers. From the highest balcony of the Spire, Archon watched the miraculous dawn, his face illuminated not with relief, but with a grim understanding. He saw the hope on the faces below, but he also saw the strategic reality. This was not a victory, it was a provocation. That pillar of light was the loudest signal imaginable, a blazing dinner bell for the entity that fed on darkness. It would now turn its full, furious attention toward the source of its pain, and anything standing in its path would be swept away. Lyra did not hesitate. She found the remaining council members in their chamber, their faces a mix of awe and fear. She stood before them, no longer a supplicant, but a commander. "The time for debate is over," she stated, her voice ringing with the authority of the light outside. "The Forge has given us a chance, not a permanence. It has drawn a line in the sand for our enemy. We must cross that line to the Valley of Luminar, now, while the path is clear. The ancient fortress there is our only hope." Archon, standing silently in the doorway, gave a single, solemn nod. His support, unspoken but undeniable, broke the last of the resistance. The evacuation was authorized. Across the city, the moment of hope transformed into a flurry of organized action. The light wardens moved through the districts, their voices firm and calming, directing people to take only what was essential and to assemble at the designated gates. The mood was not one of panic, but of determined purpose. Families gathered heirlooms not of gold, but of memory, a child clutching a glowing toy, a baker wrapping a starter that had been passed down for generations. They were not just fleeing, they were carrying the embers of their culture with them. But high above, the brilliant pillar of light from the forge suddenly wavered. It did not dim, but it flickered, as if a great, invisible hand had closed around it, testing its strength. The new dawn held its breath, and the retreating shadows at the edge of the world seemed to pause, gathering themselves for a response that everyone now knew was coming. The journey to Luminar had begun, but the road ahead was long, and the night was preparing its answer. The sky above the peaks did not darken, it vanished. The umbral veil, enraged by the beacon's defiance, ceased its creeping advance and became a solid wall of absolute night. This was no longer a storm of shadow, but a tide of negation, a wave of pure anti-light that rolled across the landscape with startling speed, swallowing the horizon as it rushed toward the mountain. Inside the crystal cavern, the brilliant light from the Adamant forge faltered, its steady beam flickering wildly as the first shockwave of darkness struck the mountain slopes. The ground beneath Finn's feet bucked violently, and a rain of diamond shards fell from the ceiling like frozen tears. The stone sentinel, bathed in the forge's glow, turned from its peaceful vigil toward the cavern entrance. It did not roar a challenge. It moved with a silent, solemn purpose, placing its colossal body of granite and starfire directly into the opening, becoming a living barricade against the tide. For a few precious moments, it held. Then the sound began, a grinding, shrieking noise of impossible pressure as the concentrated will of the veil pressed against the ancient guardian. Hairline fractures appeared across the Sentinel's stone chest, spreading like black lightning. It was not being pushed back. It was being systematically unmade. Ilara's voice was calm, but her words carried a final, chilling weight. She explained the ancient failsafe, a protocol designed for this exact scenario. The forge could not be allowed to fall into the veil's grasp. They could channel all its rekindled power into a single, supernova pulse, a blast of such pure creation that it would critically wound the entity of pure negation. It would be a final act of magnificent light, a choice that would give the fleeing kingdoms a fighting chance. The cost was absolute. The pulse would erase the mountain and everything within it. They would have to initiate the sequence and then find a way to escape a disintegrating fortress of rock in mere moments, a near impossibility. Finn did not argue. He saw the cracks widening across the Sentinel's form and knew they had run out of options. As Ilara moved to the central plinth, her hands already moving in the complex activation patterns, Finn turned and ran back into the trembling tunnels. His scout's mind, trained to find paths where none existed, scanned the collapsing passages for any fissure, any forgotten air shaft, any glimmer of a way out. He was not looking for certainty, only for a chance, however slim, to carry the story of their choice beyond the coming dawn. A river of humanity and fragile light flowed from the gates of Ithilgard, a stark contrast to the oppressive dark of the landscape. The grand exodus was underway, a procession guided by the unwavering glow of the light wardens who formed a protective rearguard, their inner dawns a moving shield against the night. The umbral veil, its primary focus still locked on the defiant beacon in the mountains, did not unleash its full might upon them. Instead, it harried the caravan with smaller, faster shades that darted from the shadows like predatory fish, testing the edges of their luminous defense. Each skirmish was brief but draining, forcing a warden to flare their light to drive the entity back, a little more of their precious resilience fading with every encounter. The constant, gnawing attacks wore down not just their energy, but the very morale of the people, whose hopeful murmurs began to be punctuated by fearful glances into the void. Amidst the flowing river of people, Lyra and Archon Kale walked as one. Their combined leadership was a tangible force, a calming presence that held the desperate march together. Yet, a fundamental tension pulsed between them. Lyra, feeling the immense pressure of the distant, flickering forge, urged a relentless, necessary speed. Every moment felt borrowed, and she believed survival meant reaching the valley with as many as possible, even if it meant a heartbreaking pace. Kale, his perspective forever altered, saw the Exodus not as a statistic, but as a kingdom of individuals. He insisted they could not leave a single soul, that the very meaning of their flight would be lost if they abandoned their own people. This philosophical divide between the visionary and the shepherd came to a head when a cry rose from the back of the column. A cart carrying several elderly citizens had broken an axle, and a swift-moving pocket of shades had slipped through the defensive line, cutting the stragglers off from the main body. Without a moment's hesitation, Kale made his decision. He called for a contingent of the bravest Wardens, and before Lyra could voice a protest, turned back into the gloom. This was not the act of a distant ruler, but of a man reclaiming his oath. He fought not with weapons, but with the sheer, brilliant force of his presence, a beacon of resolve that pushed the shadows back long enough to link arms with the frightened families and guide them to safety. The successful rescue mission did more than save lives. It forged an unbreakable bond of trust between the people and their leaders. A united, determined silence fell over the caravan, a collective will to see this through together. But unity had its cost. The rescue, while noble, had stolen precious hours they could not afford. As the last of the stragglers were integrated back into the moving mass, a deep, world-shaking tremor passed through the very ground. All eyes turned back toward the sunken peaks. For a single, breathtaking instant, the entire horizon ignited in a silent, white fire, a dawn born from a cataclysm. The light was both beautiful and terrible, a final, magnificent pulse that illuminated their faces for a long moment before fading, leaving an even deeper darkness in its wake. The distant mountains were gone, the forge was silent, and in that profound quiet, the caravan knew the distraction was over. The full, terrible attention of the umbral veil, now finished with the peaks, was turning slowly and inexorably toward them. The Pass of Echoes was the last gateway to salvation, a narrow defile carved between two ancient peaks, but the way forward was no longer a path of stone and air. It had become a wall of living nothingness, a titanic form that was less a being and more the absence of all things. This was the heart of the umbral veil, no longer a creeping mist, but a concentrated entity of absolute void. Its presence was a cold so profound, it felt like the end of time. As it loomed over the mouth of the pass, the collective light of the caravan began to dim, the inner dawn of the Wardens flickering like candles in a gale. From the front ranks, a soft, despairing sigh rose as the warmth of life itself was drawn from them, their strength fading not into pain, but into a quiet, willing stillness. Lyra felt the hope of thousands drain away into that silent hunger. She knew then that no amount of starlight, no matter how pure or powerful, could ever defeat this. You could not fight nothing with something. It would only consume whatever you threw at it. The only possible weapon was something it could not recognize as a threat, something it had no mechanism to process. She turned to Archon Kale, whose own inner light was wavering under the pressure, and she did not speak of attack. She spoke of surrender, not of their lives, but of their stories. We must offer it a gift, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the spiritual silence. A gift it does not know how to take. Without another word, Lyra reached out and took Kale's hand. He, in turn, reached for the nearest light warden, and the gesture spread like a quiet wave through the remaining defenders. They joined hands, forming a chain of humanity at the edge of the abyss. They closed their eyes, and instead of projecting their power outward in a defiant shield, they turned it inward. They pooled their most cherished, personal memories, the unarmed treasures of a lifetime. A mother's lullaby, the scent of rain on hot stone, the weight of a child's trust, the comfort of a shared meal in hard times, the simple, unremarkable joy of a quiet afternoon. They did not hurl these memories as a challenge. They offered them freely, an unconditional gift of all the small, beautiful things that made their existence worth preserving. The entity of void hesitated. Its purpose was to consume and negate light, to erase existence. But this was not light as a source of power. This was light as love, as memory, as a simple and profound connection. It was a language it had no capacity to understand. The sheer, illogical generosity of the offering created a paradox in its core. It could not consume the gift without accepting its value, and it had no framework for value. The flawless, predatory logic of negation began to falter. The solid wall of darkness started to shimmer, then to tremble. It did not shatter with a roar, but simply began to unravel, the threads of its being loosening and dissipating into a gentle, harmless mist that faded on a wind that had not blown for weeks. As the last of the void heart dissolved into nothing, a profound and unexpected quiet settled over the pass, and in that quiet, a new light appeared. Not the magical glow of starlight or the fierce pulse of a forge, but the gentle, persistent gold of the morning sun. Its rays, true and unfiltered, broke through the permanent twilight that had gripped the world, warming their faces and illuminating the clear, open path down into the green and waiting valley of Luminar. Sunlight, true and unfiltered, felt like a forgotten memory on their skin as the last of those who journeyed here stepped into the Luminar Valley. This was a sanctuary untouched by the long night, its green fields and clear streams protected by ancient, dormant magic that had slumbered in the very rock. But the relief of arrival was quickly tempered by the sheer scale of the task before them. They were newcomers in a fresh land, carrying little more than the clothes on their backs and the weight of all they had left behind. The experience of their journey was still close, and in the quiet moments, you could see it in the eyes of those who gazed toward the empty horizon, marked by the concern that the shadow they had outrun might one day find them again. It was in this delicate space, surrounded by uncertainty, that Lyra and Archon stood together before their people. They made their first decree as equals, their voices united. Our new home will not be built upon vaults of stored starlight, they declared. We will build it upon the shared light of our memory and our cooperation. This was a radical shift, a complete departure from the old hierarchy that had prized magical power above all else. The foundation of their society would now be the stories they told one another, the skills they shared, and the simple, profound act of helping a neighbor raise a wall. It was a beautiful, untested idea, and its newness was palpable. Could a civilization truly be sustained on something as intangible as collective remembrance? As the first wooden shelters began to rise from the meadow, Lyra walked the perimeter of their new settlement. Her hand brushed against a cluster of ferns, and there, nestled in the soil, she found it. A single seed, no larger than her thumbnail, pulsed with a soft, internal radiance. It was a gift, a final legacy from the star dear she and Finn had saved. It held no grand power, only a quiet, persistent potential for life. Cradling it in her palm, she understood this was the true treasure they had carried from their former world, not a weapon to fight the dark, but a promise of the new growth to come. The first sign of their return was a faint stirring in the earth near the settlement's edge, a place where the ground was still soft from recent work. Weeks had passed since the mountains fell, and the community had settled into the quiet rhythms of building a new life, their personal reflections kept close. So when the earth shifted, and a hidden door of woven roots and stone swung inward, the two figures that stumbled out into the twilight seemed less like people and more like visions from a forgotten dream. Finn supported a weary Alara, their faces etched with exhaustion, their clothes tattered, but their eyes holding a quiet, unextinguished light. The Sentinel's final act had not been to fight, but to fold its crumbling form around them, its stone becoming a protective cocoon that rode the shockwave of the Forge's pulse, carrying them through the deep, secret veins of the world to this unexpected deliverance. Their arrival sent a wave of disbelief, and then pure, unrestrained joy through the settlement. People who had held them in memory now wept with relief, embracing them as living reminders of a past they thought was entirely lost. But the celebration was tinged with a strange new distance. Finn and Alara carried the weight of the cataclysm in a way the others did not. They had felt the mountain's transition, had witnessed the Forge's final, magnificent breath from its very heart. While the community reflected on what was taken, Finn and Alara carried the memory of what they had personally chosen to end, a quiet understanding that made them feel like keepers of history in a world struggling to be born. From a small, carefully guarded pouch, Alara produced their sole physical treasure, a shard from the Adamant Forge's core. It was no larger than her palm, cool to the touch, yet within its crystalline depths pulsed a soft, stable rhythm of light, a literal spark of the old world's heart. Many assumed this powerful artifact would become a new source of energy, a tool to speed their rebuilding. But Finn and Alara had learned a deeper truth on their journey. They saw the importance of not simply rebuilding the old ways, of not seeking power for its own sake. Instead, they asked Lyra and Kale for a small plot of land at the very center of the new community. There, with the eyes of the entire settlement upon them, they did not build a generator or a weapon. They knelt and placed the shard deep into the rich soil of the valley, a quiet tribute to one world and a hopeful seed for the next. For days, nothing happened. Then, a delicate green shoot, threaded with veins of silver, broke through the earth. It grew not with the wild speed of magic, but with the patient, deliberate pace of a true living thing. Weeks turned into a cycle of the moon, and the shoot became a sapling, and then a young tree. Its trunk and branches were not wood, but a lattice of living crystal, and from its leaves hung a gentle, constant glow that bathed the central green in a soft, comforting radiance. It produced no heat, it powered no machinery. Its light was the light of memory, a visual echo of the Forge's purpose, now transformed into a promise of peaceful growth. This memory tree became the undeniable heart of the community, a place for quiet reflection, for shared meals, and for children to play under its protective boughs. And it was under this gentle, perpetual light that the people, guided by the quiet encouragement of their leaders, began the most important construction of all. They gathered, not with tools of stone and wood, but with the tools of voice and remembrance, to record the story of the Starborn Kingdoms, ensuring that every name, every story, and every lesson from the Great Fall would never fade from the world. Master Weaver's hands, though gnarled with age, moved with a gentle purpose as he gathered the survivors each evening under the memory tree's soft glow. He did not command them to speak, but instead invited them to share, patiently weaving their whispered accounts of personal journeys and quiet hopes into a single, unfolding chronicle. At first, the stories were simple, tales of favorite recipes or the sound of a familiar street. But as trust grew, deeper memories surfaced, and with them came a palpable shift in the air around the gathering. The very light from the tree seemed to pulse in harmony with their voices, growing warmer and more resilient as the community's shared narrative took shape. This collective act of remembrance was becoming a new kind of enchantment, one that fortified their spirits in a way stored starlight never could. Yet not every thread in this new tapestry was easy to weave. Some stories carried a profound weight, and speaking them aloud felt like revisiting a place of deep feeling. A farmer's voice would break recounting the last time he saw his orchards, now changed by the dark. A mother would fall silent, unable to finish the tale of a child's forgotten laugh. These moments of shared emotion threatened to fracture the very unity the weaving was meant to build, creating visible divisions between those who wished to remember everything and those who preferred to let the past rest. Lyra saw this tension and understood its importance, so she joined the weavers each day, not as their high oracle, but as another voice in the circle. She shared her own story, not of power, but of profound fear, describing the quiet moment in the archives when she first understood their world was changing and the heavy weight of responsibility that followed. Her openness was a quiet revolution. By modeling the courage to be imperfect, she gave others permission to speak their own difficult truths without shame. The act of sharing, not just the memory itself, became the source of their strength. When the final thread was woven into the great narrative tapestry, the community gathered to behold it. It was not a chronicle of kings and conquests, but a living portrait of their collective heart, a shield against despair more durable than any wall of stone. And as they stood there, bathed in the light of their own shared story, a new generation of children was born into the valley. Their eyes, from their very first breath, held the faint, innate glow of the memory tree, as if the legacy of those who came before had been woven directly into their souls. Illyra's star well was gone, but her purpose was not. Standing before the young sapling of living crystal, she made a quiet vow. She would not rebuild what was lost, but nurture what had been found. She called this new order the Keepers of the Echo, and their duty was simple yet profound. They would tend the memory tree, and more importantly, they would learn the stories woven into its light. Her first students were the children, born with that soft glow in their eyes, and her lessons were unlike any taught in the old kingdoms. She did not teach them to hoard or control light. She taught them that true light was born from shared laughter, from a tear shed for a friend, from the quiet satisfaction of a day's honest work. They learned to feel the connection between a joyful memory and the tree's responsive shimmer, understanding that emotion itself was the most renewable source of energy their new world possessed. Yet, in this peaceful society built on remembrance, Finn felt unmoored. His body, trained for perilous journeys and swift action, now had no enemy to outrun and no distant peak to scout. The slow, patient work of the keepers felt like a different kind of wilderness, one his instincts could not navigate. He watched Illyra, serene in her new role, and felt a restless ache, a fear that his particular strengths had become obsolete in a world that prized quiet reflection over bold exploration. This tension came to a head one evening As he wandered near the valley's edge, he found a section of the great narrative tapestry, temporarily moved for mending, left exposed to the night air. A sudden, freak wind threatened to tear the fragile fabric, and Finn's reaction was pure instinct. He was across the clearing in a heartbeat, his body shielding the cloth, his hands gently but firmly securing it. In that moment of protective action, his purpose snapped into clear focus. He was not meant to sit and weave the stories. He was meant to guard them. His new role was that of a sentinel, not of a mountain forge, but of a people's entire heart. He would protect the physical tapestry from time and the elements. He would walk the valley's borders, not seeking new paths, but ensuring the safety of the one path they had chosen. He would be the shield that allowed the keepers to work in peace. This partnership between Alara's nurturing wisdom and Finn's vigilant strength created a beautiful, sustainable balance. The knowledge was not just preserved in a fragile archive, it was actively lived and fiercely protected, allowing the culture to put down deep, resilient roots. From his watchpost on a high ridge, Finn looked out over the sleeping valley. The memory tree pulsed with a soft, steady light below, and for the first time, he felt no restlessness, only a deep and quiet fulfillment. Then his eyes caught a faint glimmer far in the distance. The tree's light, reflected off a sheer, icy peak miles away, winked back at him like a promise. It was a silent reminder that even the smallest, most carefully tended light can travel farther than anyone can imagine. The charter was written not on vellum, but on the living wood of the memory tree. Archon Kale, his title now a quiet echo of a world gone, spent long days carving the words with a simple blade, each letter a physical testament to his new understanding. The Accords of Luminar were his final, greatest act of leadership, a document that formally dissolved the very monarchy he had once embodied. It established a governing council where representatives were chosen not for their lineage, but for their demonstrated wisdom and their capacity for compassion, virtues forged in the hardship of their long journey. The old hierarchy, with its crystal spires and inherited starlight, was gently set aside as a new chapter began. Letting the last vestiges of his formal authority slip away was a profound personal trial for Kale. The weight of the crown had been immense, but its familiar presence was a part of his identity. To consciously set it aside felt like stepping off a solid path into an open field, a final test of whether his transformation from ruler to servant was complete. He made the choice without ceremony, adding his name to the list of council elders as a simple citizen, his future influence resting entirely on the respect he could earn through his actions, not demand through his station. This peaceful, willing transfer of power did more than just create a new government. It cemented the soul of their fledgling society, proving that their rebirth was not merely a change of location, but a genuine evolution of the spirit. The very first meeting of the new council was held not in a sealed chamber, but in the open air, seated in a circle upon smooth stones beneath the spreading, luminous branches of the memory tree. The gentle light that filtered through the leaves seemed to bless their deliberations, a constant reminder that their authority now flowed from the shared heart of the people, rooted in the same soil that sustained their hope. The gentle pulse of the memory tree was the first thing Lyra felt each morning, a soft rhythm against her spirit. It was in this quiet space between sleep and waking that the new visions began to visit her. They were no longer the searing prophecies of collapsing skies, but something entirely different. She saw the valley not as it was, but as it could be, with the luminous branches of their central tree spreading wide enough to shade a thriving town. She saw unfamiliar faces, travelers from distant lands, drawn not by conquest, but by the simple, compelling light of their shared stories. These were not warnings, but invitations, glimpses of a future woven from threads of quiet cooperation and mutual growth. The clarity of these dreams was both a comfort and a source of deep unease. She had fought so hard to dismantle the old dependency on oracles and stored power. To stand before the council and speak of a guaranteed, flourishing future felt like building a new kind of cage, one where people might stop building their own destinies and simply wait for her vision to unfold. The community's hard-won self-reliance was too precious to risk. Her solution was as subtle as the dreams themselves. That evening, as the children gathered under the glowing boughs for their daily story, Lyra joined their circle. She did not sit in a place of honor, but among them on the soft grass. She began to speak, not as a high oracle, but as a storyteller. She told them a tale of a little seed that carried a tiny spark inside, and how that seed grew into a great tree whose light was so kind and so true that it called to other seeds in distant forests, teaching them how to shine, too. She spoke of a day when the whole world would be connected by a web of gentle, shimmering light, all born from that first, small choice to nurture rather than to command. The children listened, their own faintly glowing eyes wide with wonder, absorbing the tale not as a prediction, but as a beautiful possibility. In this act, Lyra planted the vision deep within the culture's youngest hearts, ensuring that hope would not be a fleeting emotion, but a foundational belief passed down through generations. It was a hope that would make them resilient, not complacent, curious about the wider world rather than fearful of it. And one serene night, as she rested, her dreamscape expanded until she was floating in the embrace of a vast, starry sky, a tapestry of light so clear and untroubled it felt like a homecoming. There was no shadow, no hunger, only a profound and peaceful connection. She awoke with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. This was not a mere dream of what might be. It was a quiet promise of what already was, waiting for them to grow into it. The first festival of echoes began not with a proclamation, but with a quiet gathering as dusk settled over the valley. One by one, families brought small, handmade lanterns to the clearing beneath the memory tree, their soft, individual lights mirroring the gentle pulse from the branches above. There was no schedule or formal order, only an open space where anyone could step forward and share a piece of their heart. An elderly woman, her hands trembling slightly, sang a simple lullaby her grandmother had taught her, a melody from a world that no longer existed. A young man then spoke, his voice thick with emotion, about the friend who had shared their last piece of bread during the long march, a story of everyday generosity that felt as monumental as any legend. The air was thick with a beautiful, poignant mix of laughter and tears, a collective release of feeling and gratitude that everyone sensed but no one needed to name. It was a delicate balance, this dance between reflection and celebration, and for a moment, the entire community seemed to hold its breath, wondering if the weight of the past would overshadow the promise of the present. Then Finn and Alara stepped into the circle together. Finn stood tall, his scout's posture a familiar sight, while Alara's calm presence seemed to steady the very air around them. They did not tell a story of glorious victory or grand magic. Instead, they shared the final moments of the stone Sentinel, the ancient guardian of the forge. Finn described the deep, grinding sound of the mountain shifting, and the Sentinel's deliberate choice to become a shield, not a weapon. Alara spoke of the profound loyalty etched into its stone heart, a programming so deep it understood that its ultimate purpose was not to fight to the last, but to protect the possibility of a future, even at the cost of its own existence. They transformed a tale of certain transition into a lasting lesson on the nature of true strength. The children listening, their faces bathed in the tree's light, understood not the complexity of the magic, but the simplicity of the choice. They saw that the most powerful force in their new world was not stored in crystals, but in the decision to stand for others. As the last story was shared and the final song faded into the night, a deep, contented silence fell over the community. In that quiet, something remarkable happened. The memory tree, which had glowed with a steady light all evening, began to pulse with a new, stronger rhythm, its soft radiance swelling and receding in a gentle wave that seemed to sync perfectly with the collective, calm heartbeat of the people gathered beneath its branches. The seasons turned in the gentle rhythm of the valley, and the boy who had run through shadows was now an old man with a map of memories written on his face. Finn led a small party of curious young keepers to the edge of the Glimmer wood, a journey not of reclamation, but of quiet witnessing. The air was different here, no longer thick with a predatory chill, but carrying the clean, damp scent of earth after a long rain. Where the cataclysmic light of the forge's final pulse had once scoured the land, the forest was not rebuilding itself as it was. It was becoming something else entirely. Patches of the ground now glowed with a soft, greenish light, and from the trunks of fallen trees sprang fungi that pulsed with a slow, blue heartbeat. Vines draped from branches, their leaves edged in a silver luminescence that shimmered when the wind passed through them. This was a new kind of magic, a wild hybridization of light and life that had never been seen before. For Finn, every step was a conversation with the past. A familiar rock formation would trigger the memory of a desperate sprint, the cold breath of a shade on his neck. The quiet chirping of an unseen creature sounded like the whispers from the Bridge of Whispers. The hard-won peace he had cultivated in the valley felt fragile here, tested by the very ground he walked on. He had to pause often, closing his eyes and breathing deeply, anchoring himself in the present reality of this strange, beautiful recovery instead of the remembered tension of the fall. His companions, born after the great journey, saw only wonder, but Finn carried the weight of the contrast. When one of the younger scouts pointed to a flower whose petals swirled with captured starlight and suggested taking a cutting back for study, Finn shook his head. His voice was firm but gentle. "We are not here to manage this," he told them. "We are here to learn from it. The wilderness has a right to heal in its own way, without our hands guiding it." He did not clear away the creeping luminous moss or mark a path for others to follow. He simply observed, his scout's eyes now trained on growth instead of threat, and he made careful notes in his journal, recording the shapes and colors of this new world being born from the legacy of the old. His report to the council held no grand declarations. It was a simple, profound confirmation. "The world is not healing to return to what it was," he stated. It is transforming into something entirely its own, a future we could never have planned. The old maps are truly obsolete. The greatest lesson was not in the return of light, but in its stubborn, unpredictable creativity. From his pocket, he produced a single, dry seed pod, no larger than a pebble. It was from a flower he had found growing in the crack of a shattered obsidian boulder. He placed it on the table before them. It does not glow, he explained. It simply is. A quiet promise that the most hopeful futures are often the ones we do not design, but are wise enough to simply welcome. The question came on an afternoon, drenched in the valley's gentle light, from a child who had never known a sky without stars. "Lyra, you were there," the little girl began, her small hand resting on the older woman's knee. Why did the shining kingdoms have to fall? It was not a request for the story, which she had heard many times, but a search for its heart, for the reason behind the great and sorrowful change. In that moment, Lyra felt the immense weight of the answer. How could she explain the slow creep of complacency, the fear that froze a council, or the taste of true despair to someone whose entire world was defined by safety and shared purpose? The history was preserved, but its meaning was now a living thing that needed to be questioned anew with every generation. Lyra took the girl's hand and led her to the quiet center of the community, where the memory tree stood with its soft, perpetual glow. She did not offer a simple lesson about good and bad. Instead, she sat with the child beneath the luminous branches and spoke of stories as living entities. An ending is never just an ending, Lyra said, her voice as calm as the rustling leaves. It is the seed of a new beginning. The old world fell not because it was evil, but because it forgot how to grow. Its great towers were magnificent, but their foundations could not bend in the wind. She told the girl that the most important stories are not the ones carved in crystal, but the ones we choose to live by every day, the ones we have the courage to change when they no longer serve the light. Then Lyra did something she had never done before. She placed the child's small hand directly upon the warm, crystalline bark of the tree. "This is not a monument to a finished tale," she whispered. "It is a book waiting for your chapter." The moment the girl's fingers made contact, the tree itself seemed to breathe. A tiny, new branch, no thicker than a blade of grass, sprouted from a spot just above her touch. It unfurled a single, minuscule leaf that pulsed with a light subtly different from the rest, a brighter, more curious gold. It was a quiet, biological miracle, a direct response to the innocent inquiry of a new soul. This was the true passing of the torch, ensuring their culture would not become a museum piece, but would evolve, its roots deepened by the past, and its branches reaching for a future only the young could envision. The discovery was made by a child chasing a stray sun moth near the valley's eastern entrance. There, half hidden by ferns, stood a figure no taller than a grown man, carved from a single piece of dark, river-worn stone. Its features were rough, its form only suggesting the broad shoulders and steadfast posture of a sentinel. No one knew who had placed it there, or when. It held no weapon, offered no inscription. It was simply present, a quiet watcher at the gate. Word spread slowly, and soon a worn path formed to the site, not from any decree, but from the gentle pull of collective memory. It became a place of quiet pilgrimage, where individuals would come to stand for a moment in reflective silence, honoring not just the stone sentinel of legend, but every forgotten guardian, every quiet contribution made by beings known and unknown during the long journey through the dark. The simplicity of the carving invited personal meaning, each visitor finding in its rough lines a different story worth remembering. This very simplicity soon became the center of a gentle debate. Some in the community, their hearts full of gratitude, proposed building a proper shrine around the figure, perhaps engraving the names of those who came before, or shielding it from the weather with a graceful pavilion. They argued that such profound devotion deserved a grander, more permanent display of honor, a monument that would stand for all ages. Others, however, felt that its power was inextricably linked to its solitude and its rough, unadorned state. To enshrine it, they gently cautioned, would be to cage the very essence of what it represented. It was not a ruler to be honored in splendor, but a companion who had chosen to stand its watch in the untamed world. The discussion was never angry, but it was deeply felt, touching upon the fundamental question of how a society chooses to value its past. The council, now led by the same woman who as a young girl had asked Lyra why the kingdoms fell, listened carefully to all voices. After a period of reflection, she spoke not with the force of command, but with the clarity of one who had learned from the oldest stories. She reminded them of the Adamant forge, a place of immense power that was ultimately allowed its peaceful rest. She spoke of the memory tree, whose strength came not from being controlled, but from being nurtured and allowed to grow in its own way. To build a monument around the Sentinel, she suggested, would be to claim it, to manage the memory it inspired. To leave it as it was, to let the rain smooth its edges and the sun warm its stone, was to continue the story. The council decided the Sentinel would remain exactly as it was found, a quiet gift from an unknown hand to all who needed its silent company. This choice resonated through the community as a powerful reinforcement of their deepest value. It was a declaration that true remembrance does not demand grand displays of stone and metal. It lives in the quiet respect of the living, in the choice to visit, to reflect, and to then carry that reflection back into the daily work of building a compassionate world. The statue was not a destination, but a touchstone. In the years that followed, a soft, luminous moss began to grow at the Sentinel's base, slowly climbing its weathered form. It cradled the stone in a gentle, green light, as if the valley itself was offering a peaceful, final embrace. The age of striving had found its quiet, natural end, not in a dramatic conclusion, but in the patient, tender reclaiming of a guardian by the peaceful world it helped make possible. The original story tapestry had grown into a landscape of woven memory, its edges now brushing the vaulted ceiling of the new Hall of Echoes. Generations of hands had added to its expanse, turning the chronicle of early times into a sprawling portrait of an entire people's journey. It was no longer a relic to be viewed, but a living document that breathed with the community's daily life, its newest threads still holding the scent of hearth smoke and fresh soil. Yet its magnificent size presented a profound and growing challenge. The fabric was becoming too heavy for its frames, its most ancient sections growing fragile with time, raising a quiet concern among the keepers. How could they preserve a history that never stopped growing? The council's decision was a stroke of profound wisdom. They chose not to simply protect the physical artifact, but to liberate the stories it held. The most vital tales from the tapestry were translated into soaring songs, into expressive dances that told of the long journey without a single word, and into an oral tradition where elders shared the narratives with the young by firelight. This was not a replacement for the tapestry, but a multiplication of its soul. The stories were no longer confined to a single hall. They were set free to live in the hearts of every citizen, becoming the invisible bedrock of their identity. As a young weaver, her own life, a recent addition to the great cloth, carefully added her first golden thread to the ongoing saga. The hall was filled with a sound that answered every question of preservation. A chorus of children's voices, clear and bright, sang one of the oldest songs from the tapestry, their melody a living thread connecting the first dawn in the valley to the promise of all the dawns yet to come. The sky began to bleed away its color, not with the gentle grace of sunset, but with a swift, sickening pull. A bruise of unnatural purple spread from the horizon, swallowing the blue and extinguishing the sun in a cold, silent grip. This was no ordinary eclipse. It was a suffocation, an artificial night that descended with the weight of a place long remembered, and with it came a chill that had nothing to do with the air. It was the chill of memory, the ghost of the long shadow they had outrun, and it settled over the valley with a palpable dread. Ancient fears, thought to be healed, stirred in the hearts of the elders. Whispers of the umbral veil, of the weeping city, and the crushing silence flickered behind every wide eye. For the first time in generations, the memory tree's gentle light seemed fragile, a tiny boat on a vast, dark sea. Lyra, her form now bowed with the weight of countless seasons, felt the shadow not in her bones, but in her spirit. She saw the panic, threatening to take root in the faces around her. She looked at Finn, his scout's instincts coiled tight, and at Alara, whose calm presence was a bedrock. She looked at the council, leaders who knew only peace. They had no stored starlight to unleash, no great beacon to rekindle. Their only weapon was the story they had built together. Without a word, she moved to the center of the clearing, her hand finding the warm bark of their tree. Finn and Alara joined her without hesitation, and the council followed, forming the first link in a chain. Then, Lyra raised her voice, not in a shout, but in a clear, steady note. It was the opening line of the Song of Dawn, the very melody woven into the heart of their great tapestry, a song of hope, first sung by desperate light wardens in a city, weeping shadow. The call was a lifeline. One by one, every man, woman, and child in the valley moved to join the circle. Hands clasped other hands, a living, unbroken ring of solidarity that pulsed with a shared heartbeat. They were not warriors standing against the dark. They were a family, holding fast to one another, and then they sang. Their voices rose, not in a perfect chorus, but in a powerful, raw harmony of shared belief. A farmer's rough baritone blended with a child's clear treble, an elder's quavering whisper strengthened into certainty beside a young weaver's confident melody. They sang of the first light after the long night, of the warmth of a shared meal, of the courage found in a friend's eyes. They were not singing about their light. They were singing their light into being. Each note was a thread of memory, a declaration of love for their home, a refusal to surrender the dawn they had earned. As the song swelled, something miraculous began to happen. The collective resonance of their voices, their unwavering faith, began to create a visible counter-harmony in the air, a soft, gold and silver radiance bloomed from their joined hands, rising to meet the oppressive purple gloom. It was not a shield or a weapon, but a pure, sonic dawn. The two forces met in the sky above the valley, the artificial night pressing down, and the living song pushing up. For a breathless moment, they held in a fragile balance. Then, with the sound of a million shattering crystals of silence, the false eclipse fractured. The purple bruise splintered into 1,000 fading shards, and the true, warm light of the sun came flooding back, washing over their upturned, tear-streaked faces. The victory was absolute, and it left a profound quiet in its wake. They had not fought the shadow with force, but had simply reminded the world, with one unified voice, what the day sounded like. The memory tree, bathed in the returned sun, pulsed with a deeper, more resilient glow, its roots now fed by the undeniable truth that their community itself was the only beacon they would ever need. The memory tree now stands taller than the highest spire of old Ethelgard, a gentle, permanent star rooted in the heart of the valley. Its light does not blaze, but breathes, a soft radiance that has woven itself into the very rhythm of life here. The great saga of the Starborn Kingdoms, once a chronicle of earlier challenges, has completed its long transformation. It is no longer a reminder of what was left behind, but a quiet promise of what can be rebuilt. Parents now share it as a sleep story with their children, a tale where the deepest night is always followed by a dawn, not because of magic, but because of the simple, stubborn choice to hold on to light together. In this new context, the experiences of the past are not the focus. The resilience they forged is the entire point. Lyra's final vision, that their light would one day gently touch the stars again, no longer feels like a distant hope. It feels like the natural conclusion of a story they are still writing with every shared meal, every act of kindness, and every new thread woven into their collective tapestry. The community, forever shaped by its journey, does not look to the sky for answers. They look to each other, building a future not from crystal and decree, but from the enduring strength found in a story well told.